Hi everyone, welcome. If this is your first time attending a webinar with RankSense, welcome. If it's not your first time, then welcome back. I'm Brittany and I'll just be going through the chat and answering some of your questions. Today we're joined by Derek Hawkins from Reprise Digital, and he's going to demonstrate how to expedite the quality assurance process of site launches. So without further ado, let's get started.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Brittany. Hey, Derek, how are you? How's it going?
I'm doing well. Happy Friday the 13th.
Yeah, it was the 13, right? You know,
Yeah.
almost the 80s, right? A guy named Jason. How was everything? You're in Long Island, right?
In Queens, yeah, nearby
Queens.
Long Island City. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, north of here. You know, I know enough to know that it's north, right?
Yeah.
How's it going?
Very well. Yeah, just thankful that it's Friday. Been having a really good week so far.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, so thank you for making the time to share your expertise with us. Particularly excited about this one. We had this conversation with you, and I don't think we had people with similar stories like you. It's interesting that people coming from completely different backgrounds. So yeah, so the structure, of our webinars is we spend, about half of them just going through your journey in terms of your history as an SEO, your career, and also the context for this script and the problem that you saw, and also the journey that you took in terms of learning Python and what others can learn about it. I'm really excited to see more and more people getting involved. And then, the second part is going to be a walkthrough of your script. And so you can walk us through it, and also where how you put it together, what are your learnings. And also, yeah, that's the idea. So does that sound like a plan to you?
Yeah, sounds like a great plan to me.
Great. So why don't we start by, sharing with us your story, right? It's a very interesting one, right? How do you been through, you were in house, you've been an agency for a couple of times in different agencies. Now you're a Reprise Media.
Yeah.
And we're talking about that, have somebody in common that I know from your agency. And let's talk about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So really where it all starts is right after college. I went to school for English literature and video production, interned at a TV production studio for a semester or two, and that's when I realized that I never wanted to work in video again. Really made the pivot into marketing just off of seeing what other people were doing in the space when I was in school. It seemed like something that was really transferable from what I was learning in English literature and video production into something a little more stable. So I really started off just with whatever opportunity I could find. My very first kind of marketing exposure was with a local ad agency in my hometown, doing a little bit of everything for them. That was really my one-on-one of all things marketing. I was doing paid and organic social. I was doing some content creation. I was doing a little bit of web design, graphic design for them for about 6 months to a year. And then my first full-time marketing role was in-house with a recycled countertop organization called Ice Stone. I worked pretty much upstairs from the factory. So I was, right there with the people making the products and really understanding and learning, a little bit of everything. They hired me pretty much right out of school, and they said flat out, we don't have a lot of resources, and we know that you're very new to the space, but you're a smart guy, and it looks like that you have a lot of good ideas, and we have full confidence in you. And they kind of gave me the reins to really return back whatever ROI I could, in exchange for my salary. And without having too much of a marketing budget, I had to kind of rely on my own wits and a lot of, digital marketing principles in general, because that was all I really had access to. That's really how I got into SEO as a whole. It was a lot of trial and error, working directly on their site, learning from, webinars just like this, reading articles online, attending marketing meetups in New York City, and just taking all of this information that I was learning and picking up from my own kind of reading and from others, and applying it directly to my organization. That's really where I got my fundamental understanding of content SEO, technical SEO, backlink building. Here I was at 21 building out backlinks myself, reaching out to local publications saying, hey, like, we're this company. Gave them a really big boost in their SEO without even inherently realizing what I was doing, to the point where they ended up hiring another customer service rep to handle the influx of leads that they were getting from organic search, and from some of these new referral links that had been built up. Really kind of continued in the in-house marketing space for about 2 years, with iStone and with another organization, doing the whole gamut of everything marketing. SEO was a big forefront for me, but I was also doing graphic design for these companies. I was doing email marketing. I was doing a little bit of sales, event marketing, CRM programs, helping build out CRM initiatives, redesigning a website from scratch, and just really getting a big jack of all trades kind of mentality to marketing. Once I realized that I wanted to specialize myself, I leaned back into SEO. Got reached out. Why is that? It was really one of those trades that I felt like you had to earn it. It's the only discipline where it's not about if you have the big bucks. It's not about if you have the largest team. It's really the effort that you put into the initiative. You get back exactly what you put in.
And you feel like your jack of all trades, journey helped you a lot in SEO, right? Being exposed to, all these different roles, because I think when I look myself back of the stuff that I've been, doing, and I think being exposed to different journeys and taking ideas from them allow you to bring something new to the table and accelerates the creative process, right? I've been a sysadmin, I've been an IT, I've been dealing with routers, programming, writing code, and all these different things. And I think you probably want to end up at some point in your career trying entrepreneurial journey, because that's pretty much what an entrepreneur does. It's a jack of all trades. So that probably might be in your path even you don't realize it.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of something that I've been doing on my own, doing some freelance SEO consulting, really trying to specialize myself. I come from a family of small business owners, so that entrepreneurial spirit is very much so kind of alive and well among my family. But I would absolutely say that having a little bit of exposure into everything makes being an SEO, it really rounds out an SEO's kind of experiences and the perspectives that they bring into a problem. Me working on email marketing programs has directly helped me understand CRM and how it connects back to SEO. Working on a website redesign as the client and not as a consultant really helped me understand why a client may have particular questions that you think are very straightforward, understanding what it's like to be on the other end of the table. So I think having that broad exposure into everything just brings out a lot of new perspective. And I know that there are SEOs who come from programmer backgrounds. I know that there are SEOs who come from, writing and journalism backgrounds. And there are SEOs who come from backgrounds completely unrelated. I know SEOs who were teachers before, who were blue collar workers before, across the board. And I think having any sort of exposure outside of the SEO space just only makes you a better SEO. It gives you so much more real world perspective into the problems that you're facing on a day-to-day.
And when you say you can also empathize with different teams and even with the clients in different, so you can put yourself in their shoes and see things from their perspective and present what you want them to do in a different way so that it connects, and you get, you persuade them to move forward a lot faster. Would you say that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that SEO as a discipline is extremely worldly. You need to have a little bit of experience in everything just because of the nature of SEO. And I think at the same time, being able to understand and empathize with the teams and the clients that you're working with across disciplines, because SEO just doesn't exist in a silo. You have to have buy-in from tech teams, from strategy teams, from CEOs, CMOs. It only really works well when the whole team is rallied around the idea. If you're missing pockets in development, content writing, the overall strategy, even right down to just the general just consumer understanding, you're gonna fall short. The best SEO programs I've seen are the ones where everybody can rally around it as an idea and they really understand the value associated with it. And I think that value gets really highlighted from an SEO who has that worldly perspective, who understands the touch points and the pain points associated with UX designers, with tech teams, with design teams, with C-suites, and everything in between.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And let's fast forward to your role at Reprise Media, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that? How do you move to that, position that you are right now, and so that we start preparing the context for, why you decided to solve this problem, why Python and all that stuff.
Absolutely. So I just recently started with Reprise. I came from a similar agency and it transferred over. The Reprise team just has, such a huge wealth of knowledge in SEO in general, and I really wanted to be a part of that. When I was doing SEO at my former agency, that's where I really got my first, excuse me, exposure into Python for SEO and into automation and advanced SEO principles and tactics. With Reprise, I feel like I have an amazing foundation to kind of continue cultivating that. Whereas in other organizations, I feel like it was just not on the forefront of what they had in mind. To that same point of buy-in, when you don't have that full buy-in from your own agency, 100% or 110%, that kind of advanced work that you want to do is just not going to move forward to the same trajectory. But with Reprise, they're very much so in the field of, taking everything to the next level. So I've been with them for the past couple of months and have really made it a goal of mine to incorporate advanced SEO tactics, Python and automation for addressing some of these very large scale problems that they are facing within the organization, within our client base, as well as just scaling out, new ways to go about addressing and understanding SEO problems for a very large client.
Exactly. And to put that in perspective, right? So at Reprise, you are responsible for major brands, right? So
Yes.
it's a completely dedicated team for a major brand, which means you have major problems to address and major scale that you need to, make happen, right? And one of the things that people, when you work with little large brands, they have unlimited resources. No, that's not the case.
No, it is not.
Unlimited problems.
Yeah.
Limited resources, because no matter how big, I think you mentioned your team that works with one account is about 15 people.
Yeah.
Just an SEO.
Yep.
And that's one client, right? And I will tell you that's probably not even enough, because major brands, they have presence globally across different locations, and the problems are major, right? So it's scaling and automation, right? It's a fundamental thing that you have. If you're forward looking, you need to leverage it, right? And
Exactly.
on a team that is not necessarily, developer, a team, right?
Absolutely. And I think that Reprise really understands the fact that that need is there, and that not everybody in the SEO field are going to be developers. They recognize that
And
people come from, they don't need to be. They absolutely don't need to be. I think that when a lot of new SEOs come into the field, they feel like they should be a specialist in just one discipline, that they need to suddenly become programmers, that they need to become these veteran copywriters. No, it's being able to address the broad spectrum of SEO and to be able to have the due diligence to approach, content issues, technical issues, backlink issues, and everything that runs in between, the three core principles.
So would you say that for newcomers, does it make sense to start as a generalist, get exposed to different areas, try different things, learn as much as you can, and then find where your passion is, right? Find out, where you need to move.
Right? For sure. I think that I think any SEO who's coming into the space to start, who feels like they're just being flooded with information, should take the time to learn a little bit of everything and to see where that passion lies. Because within any team of SEOs, no matter how big or how small, you're always going to find niche specialization the more you look at it. For my own specialization, it is very much so in the technical and innovation space, being able to address how a site is actually built and some of the flaws within it, as well as being able to take a data analytics approach to content development, to understanding site architecture, to aggregating data in mass. But that's not to say that that path is the best path to go down. I don't think that me alone is going to be able to address broad problems for all things SEO. I think it requires a team of not just SEOs, but of just specialists across the board.
Exactly. And that's what I also like to emphasize, right? You don't need to be a Python developer to be a great SEO, because there's a lot of different problems.
Yeah.
I was, just talking to an enterprise SEO where his role is not doing audits. He's not doing a lot of the different things that we're doing. He calls it product-led SEO. Eli Scarlett, I was talking to him. It's product-led SEO. My role is to figure out with data a product that they need to build that is going to drive organic, that is an untapped niche. And I said, wow, that's fascinating, because I can understand why that is super valuable for big enterprises. But I didn't think that, didn't think about it, didn't approach it that way, that they're building a product just for SEO, just to capture demand that is untapped, that requires a development team, requires putting together a full team that will make it happen. And he said his role is to that's what he does. His main role is to put together the team, identify who's going to be doing what, project manage it, put the what's going to be the output and everything, the business plan, and help with the execution.
There's so many interesting subsections of SEO that I've been seeing, especially now with how organizations are looking at their SEO departments and reevaluating them. I know that there are some amazing in-house brands that are building out, project management disciplines purely for SEO because they see the value and to understand the complexity and the pipelines associated with building out an SEO forward content strategy, to the point where they need dedicated SEOs who are working in an operational capacity. I know that there's a lot of organizations that have SEO data scientists whose roles are not to optimize sites, but to understand search behavior and audience development. There are so many disciplines, and I think, the more SEOs being bought in by organizations, the more diversity you're going to see in the field. So for any new coming SEO who feels like they should be specializing themselves, I feel like you can't really specialize yourself for something that you don't know or may not even exist until much later on.
Exactly. And that's why it goes back to the idea of you starting out, you start as a generalist, so you get exposure, right? And let's start narrowing down and learn about your Python journey, right? For me, it's very interesting because a lot of people say, oh, you have to have a technical background, you have to, and I talked to Elias Davos, and he was like, no, I didn't. He wrote a library, an amazing library. He comes like you from, I think he was an English major as well.
Yeah.
So people understanding that you could be in the science, training from a educational perspective, right? And you can find value and learn this technical stuff that all marketers are scared of, to try it. There's this technophobia around this.
Yeah,
so
and I think
to learn about, how you approach it and how you, if you ever felt that technophobia, how do you overcame it?
Oh, well, first off, absolutely. I don't think there's anybody in a or even people who are in the STEM space have
Mm.
some fear when they approach a new language or a new kind of technology in general. And I think anybody who tells you otherwise is just kidding you to some degree.
Exactly.
My first exposure to Python was actually, it's a two-part journey. My first purview into Python was with my last agency, which our SEO team was sitting directly with our data analytics department. Because of the value that they saw with SEO as a data discipline, they put them directly onto the performance analytics and data analytics team. So I was spending my days with data analysts, data scientists, data engineers, statisticians, and people with much more extensive knowledge in the field as me. But I was also sitting with a team of SEOs who kind of thought in that same mentality of, we are SEOs, but we just happen to know the data analytics skill. So I was really just getting some general exposure to the language through the people who I was working around. And with some of the processes that we had, what I had noticed was we were offloading specific tasks that nobody else knew how to code onto one or two people who actually had the experience of writing code. My mentality was, I don't think you should centralize your development to just one or two people, because people are not going to consistently be in that same role for a lifetime. And if you're building out processes that are reliant on only one or two people's knowledge of Python, then you're going to fall short at some point. So for me, it was really decentralizing Python and decentralizing the skill set that you would get from knowing the language and bringing it, further into the organization. And so I basically became a test case myself in trying to start from nothing and build up an expertise in it.
How
So
long did it take you to start being able to code?
I would say probably my first 3 to 6 months into Python, into actually learning it, did I build out something that I actually used for my job, for my day-to-day job.
Mhm.
I would say that the first 1 to 3 months was just absorbing as much knowledge as I could. It was understanding language fundamentals. It was really looking at snippets of code and understanding why it worked the way that it did, and just a lot of documentation reading and video watching. I kind of had to go back to what I was doing when I first entered my career, going to all of these different articles, finding videos, going to meetups, and reaching out to people directly. And I would happen to start my process at a really pivotal point where Python for SEO was becoming such a newly sought after thing. And so the community, and especially now, and it's, even a few years back, the early community um, was just looking for people who were doing this type of work, because there was not nearly as many SEOs who were doing Python, even in 2018, than there are now. And I think that number is just, growing more and more every day.
Yeah,
So
I keep saying that we have to blame or thank Paul Shapiro that he,
yeah,
with the Tech SEO boost, he started getting everything, and he's the one that invited me to do that initial Python talk. So big thank you for
yeah,
him pushing that.
his legacy in the SEO community is going to be creating a series of Python SEOs. I mean, his work, your work, Michael King's work are all the kind of foundational bases for a lot of new Python-based SEOs, because the community is so small and yet so growing that everybody is just so active and building out content and understanding. And I think that that's only helped make it less centralized. That it's that phobia of going in to Python as an SEO, where you might not have a programming background or STEM background or anything, is a lot more humanized now, because there are SEOs who also came from that same exact background, who can say,
Exactly.
this is not as intense as you may think it is or how it may look. And you're getting the information from SEOs who speak the marketing language rather than the pure programming language. So with my journey, I definitely failed a lot, definitely wrote a lot of bad code. I mean,
I still keep doing that, right?
yeah, me too. I would say that I have more.
Do you have specific resources that you recommend that were valuable in your journey, right? Because as you're failing and trying things, some people in the audience might want to skip the failing part. It's hard to skip it completely, but at least if you say, no, don't spend time on this one. This is what worked for me from from the background that you have, and a lot of people might come from the same background.
So for me, I really get a lot of my own education from self-learning and doing. There was one video series that I pretty much give to every single person who wants to learn Python, whether they are SEOs or non-SEOs. There is a YouTuber, his username is Centdex. He is a programmer who started making a series of introduction to Python videos. He now is writing, he's basically making videos about programming neural networks from scratch. But if you start at the very beginning of his video series, it goes from fundamentals of the language to fundamentals of data science and pandas, NumPy, scikit-learn for just general use, and then he goes all the way up into these very, very advanced points. So it's been a video series. His videos have been, Centdex, Centdex. His series was honestly my saving grace.
Brittany, if you can post it in the chat, that would be good. If you can find it and post it.
His videos were just positioned in a way where I could get it. And that was just me. That was just the luck of the draw of who I found.
Motivation, right? How do you motivate? Because 6 months for a lot of people is a lot of time.
Yeah.
How do you motivate yourself to go through the painful parts of the programming and the learning, right?
I feel like to really get it down, it's just like with anything else. You have to build the habit of it. You have to find ways of incorporating it into your day-to-day where it might not be the most advantageous. When I was starting, I remember very specifically coming home from work and coding on my laptop for 2 hours. I don't suspect everybody to do that, but finding just time to apply it into your day-to-day, whether it be before work, after work, during your work hours, I think it goes a long way. And
I know you say that focusing on the outcome helps if you're thinking about what you're going to accomplish at the end of the coding session.
I think it's both focusing on the outcome and focusing on the applicability. Focusing on really how the language will help you in terms of what you're doing, even if it won't help you to start, where it may bring you long term. I like to think about things in terms of timing. So it may take me 4 hours to write a script that will save me 3 minutes of time. But if I use this thing every single day for every single work day, then that 5 minutes of time becomes full-on working days. Exactly. And wouldn't you like, 3 days of your life back? When you think about it into the pure numbers of it, it's almost like, why haven't I been doing this? It's so I think the outcome really matters. I think that with a lot of people who are trying to get into the space, they are focused on the very, very advanced, like late stage point. How can I learn this language to then do keyword classification or machine learning clustering or something really extreme and advanced and things like that, where in reality, I think a lot of SEOs should be thinking about how can I learn this language so I can then go and check something on a site that would normally take me an hour in 30 seconds. How can I pull out data that my client won't give me and save the 48 hours of time that I'm not going to hear back from them when I know I need this thing done by the end of the week? It's really just like, the outcome of what you get back and the application of how often are you doing this thing? How often are you ingesting data? How often are you pulling data? Think about how much time it takes to go into whatever platform you're using, filter down by whatever you're looking for, click the export button, open up your Excel file, do whatever you have to do in the Excel file, and save it into somewhere else on your server. Doing that 100 times for whatever, over the course of maybe a month or a year, think about how much time you just save in that one application.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And talking about now, let's shift gears and talk about your script, right? Let's see if you can actually share your screen and give us a little bit of the context for the script. Right? What's the problem that you're trying to solve, and how this script that you put together help you with site launches?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just share my screen now. Oh, it looks like I need to be given the screen access. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, can you spell the name of the YouTuber again?
Yes.
The Python. See if you can spell it on the.
I believe you should be able to just Google CentDex. Yeah, DEX.
Yeah.
Just share that now. Hopefully everybody can see.
Yeah.
So thinking about this script in particular, this is actually a combination of a few different things that I use on my day-to-day. Really just brought into one, whole place. As I've been in the agency space for a few years, no matter what kind of agency you're in, no matter what kind of clients you're working with, what you find is that you end up looking for the same things as a broad principle. Working on a lot of different site launches, a lot of different site redesigns, a lot of different even optimizations where you just want to check something live. What I've seen from both myself and from others in the space is, a very manual process. You're throwing your domain into a Screaming Frog or whatever crawler you want to use. You're going onto the page directly. You're looking through the source code yourself to find some of these items, or you're relying on platforms to do it yourself, which is fine for maybe a page or two. But when you have, a full site that needs to be checked at and you want to address something immediately, you just need something that's going to be a little bit quicker than going through 100-something pages manually to make sure that everything is set up the way that it's supposed to. So I'm good.
It's advocate, because some people say, "Oh, why can I do this with Dipro or Butterfly or enterprise SEO platforms?"
I would say that two things. One, not every SEO who is working in the space has access to enterprise platforms. I try to make it a point when I do a lot of my open source code to write out things that do not require having almost any access to any SEO platform in the marketplace. Because I think a lot of SEOs feel overly reliant on using enterprise tools where they shouldn't be seen as crutches, but as kind of supplement to the core principles of search. So I think that, all the SEO tools in the space are great. I leverage them on a regular basis, but for the SEO who doesn't have a budget of, $50,000 for an enterprise platform, who still wants to have this ability at scale, this is when having a code base really becomes more advantageous.
And are there specific things that you were able to do here that you couldn't do with the platforms because of the ability to customize specifically your workflow?
I would say that in terms of putting everything in a consolidatable place that saves time, that's what I couldn't get from a typical platform. So this script has a pretty decent reliance on Screaming Frog. But my issue with Screaming Frog is that when you try to export data, you get your data in a silo. And if you want to pull everything in mass, it does not aggregate it for you. That aggregation has to be done yourself. And that can be a time-consuming process for those who are doing this across multiple sites, who are doing this across multiple different properties. If you want to see, what metadata is missing, what's duplicate, and all that, and you want to send this over to a dev team, stitching together all of this into an Excel sheet and sending it off, it takes so much longer to do that, even when you're using a platform. I think when people are thinking about the QA process, they think about it in a couple of different ways, but I think one of the biggest detriments is, okay, you're not thinking about your next step. You know, you as an SEO can find these issues, but you still need to have, once again, buy-in and a relationship with your development team to actually get these things implemented. And I've worked with more than enough developers to say that the last thing that they want is an unorganized demand list that that doesn't have really any semblance of order or construct in a way that's going to take them more time to fix your problem than they think it's worth. This is a solution that can be both to the advantage of the SEO in terms of time saving and to the advantage of the rest of your team by having all of the information you need in one definitive place.
Makes sense. So let's walk through it to show us now that we have the context.
Yeah. So I use a few different libraries here, and these are all pretty much built into any typical Python IDE. The only difference here is TQDM. TQDM is a loading bar. I like having it as a frame of reference to see how long it takes to run through a loop. So everything here should be accessible for anybody starting up. The only thing you might need to do is to install TQDM.
Yeah, and if you use Colab, it comes in and you'll have to change the from, it'll be from TQDM, import TQDM. So you don't need to be specific about notebook.
Yeah. The documentation for TQDM explains it pretty well. The use cases of if you're in a Jupyter notebook, which I'm in right now, versus say PyCharm or something along those lines. So some of the different things that we'll be covering with the script are some very typical crawling and indexing issues. If your site has HTTPS across the pages, if there are canonical tags or no index tags present on your page, this is an issue that I've seen more often than not with pages launching with nothing but no index tags on, as well as, what'd you say?
Common and dangerous.
Yeah. If there,
because a lot of people, they understand that the canonical and the no index are mutually exclusive. You can't have both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Robots.txt and XML sitemap, if they're actually present on the site. We're going to go through some metadata components, your very typical things that you're looking out for as an SEO to see if they are actually present on your site and if there's duplication or exceeding best practices. And then finally, looking at page speed. This is one of the tools that I have not really found in any sort of platform that I think every dev team wants to know is how fast is their page actually loading, and some of these other pure set metrics that are going to help understand the effect of your site. And then putting it together into just an easy to digest report. So I've actually buttoned these up into a series of functions, and I can talk a little bit about each of these functions across the board. The first function, Sitemap Check, is just an XML sitemap checker. AdverTools, I also tried not to do too many pip installed packages, but AdverTools has a great XML sitemap parser that I think probably does more justice than what I've written out here. But at the same time, I didn't want to. Yeah, exactly. And I have to give him a lot of credit to a lot of these types of functions where you need to pull something out quick. I just wanted to make sure that this script itself wasn't needing too many pip installs. So I'm just going to run this. Oh yeah, I believe I ran everything else before. The findBot function is just for finding if there's a robots.txt file. It will just return back the actual robots.txt, and if it doesn't find it, it will just tell you that it's not there. The HTTPS check is going to just tell you if the HTTPS is actually present. I could have written something much more complex in terms of SSL verification, but for most of the time when you are going through these types of checks, you start to see the discrepancies in just the actual URL itself. And then for any page that doesn't have it, you can validate that in an isolate instance, excuse me. The no index check goes directly into the source code of your page. It's parsing through the HTML to see if that actual tag is present. With the canonical check, it is checking to see if the canonical tag is present on the site, and it's checking to see if that canonical is self-referring or if it is different from the actual URL where the canonical tag is present. So there's 3 different options there. If the self-referring canonical is actually self-referring, it will return back self-referring. Otherwise, it will tell you that the canonical is there and it's not self-referring. And if it can't find anything, it will just tell you that no canonical tag is present. The redirect check, this is just checking to see in your URL if it's actually a 301. Or if it's some variation of a redirect, whether it be 301 or 302. This is typically used in a sitemap scenario. So if you are launching a new site and you've come to find out that the XML sitemap has not been updated, you start to see that pages that are now being redirected are still being served up in your XML sitemap. So it's an easy checker for that. And the last function is the speed test URL function. This is the PageSpeed Insights API call.
So Lee has an interesting question on this, and based on your experience. When he tried the PageSpeed Insights API, I haven't seen this. He saw a spike on Google Analytics. So have you seen that to be the case in your test? And if you have done anything to overcome that?
Can you just say the question one more time?
So when you run the PageSpeed Insights, obviously it's going to execute the JavaScript. It's going to render the page. You know, it seems like it's executing the analytics code in the page, and spike in the sessions are artificially inflated because of that run. Has that been the case in your test?
I haven't drilled out too much, but what I would imagine is if you look through your all the actual channels and mediums that you're coming from, and you start to see where you're being pinged from the API, you could probably set a rule specifically in analytics to solve for that, to say, if you're running this in mass and you're running it so repeatedly across a site, it's going to cause analytics issues. I would just say to exclude the actual domain so that from an analytics standpoint, you're not artificially inflating your own sessions with this API call.
Yeah. Now that I remember a trick. It's a cool thing about there's a trick that you can use to avoid that in the machine that you run the API. The problem is that the API is going to run on the Google servers. But if you run Lighthouse directly locally, you can use the etc host file. And the host file, you can put in the analytics domain and put like a loopback 127.0.0.1.
Okay.
What that's going to do is, even if the Lighthouse tries to fetch that domain, but when it's parsing the page, it's going to fail because you tricked it into thinking that the analytics domain is your local machine. So I remember that from a long time ago. That's a trick that can help you if that's becoming a problem for you, right? And that could be done also, but it has to be with the Lighthouse run directly versus the API, because API is going to run the Google servers.
Yeah,
I haven't checked, but that's what I would do, or will try to avoid that problem.
When I'm rewatching this again, I'm going to have to remember all of that and actually test for it.
Yeah, it's going to be in the recording if and I'll probably write it down in a tweet. So write it out carefully.
Looking at some of these functions in practice, we can just run them to see very straightforwardly if a sitemap is present and if a robots.txt file is present. I'm using a site called aclion.com. aclion is a recruitment firm who I used to work for way back when. I know the site really well, so I have a tendency of using this as my test site. So what we're doing here is we're running the function, and then we're checking to see if the function returned back an actual file. The if statement in the sitemap present is basically telling us, did the function find something and or did it return back nothing? So it's letting us know that it's there, and our sitemap present variable is holding our sitemap. You can see below that with the robots present variable, which was from our findBot function, that it has also found something, and so it's returning back that the robots.txt is present. Just for reference, I wanted to highlight what it returns back, and there it is, just the robots.txt file. Thinking about all of those functions that we just went over as well, this is the breakdown of just looking for all of those properties, specifically in an XML sitemap. One of the issues that I found with a lot of different sites is that when they launch their XML sitemaps, unless you have a developer who is very specifically looking and making sure that this is all checked for, these are one of the places where I very commonly find issues right upon launch, where it's an old XML sitemap or an XML sitemap that was never updated, that you start to find a lot of issues in. So what we're doing here is we're parsing out every single link from aclion's sitemap. We're building out a new data frame, just a collection of tabular data, into its own variable, and we're going to run all of those functions for checking the HTTP status, the actual status code in the sitemap, if it's a redirect, if it was ever redirected, if there's a no index tag present, and if there's a canonical tag present, and what the status is. And then we're going to collect all of that data and put it into one complete place. So this should run and take around, I would say, a minute. I was just testing this morning to make sure, and yep, there we go. You can see the TQDM bar is loading up. And once again, why I really like using this is because it gives you an idea of how long your iteration should take. It's iterating around 1.7 URLs a second. It typically runs into a couple of snags, this loop, just because of the actual URLs themselves. But if you're running this on your own site, you should expect pretty similar results at around 1 to 2 URLs per second. Once again, that totally depends on the restraints of your site and how requests, which is the library I'm using to make these calls, is responding to your site.
And when you were doing this manually, right? How much time, if you were to estimate, would that typically take you to do these kind of checks manually, right?
I would say that if you were checking through this manually and you were going through, let's say, 286 pages, what you're probably doing is you're in Screaming Frog and you have one or a few different browsers up. And so you're going between Screaming Frog to check there, and you're checking the site to see what's showing up there. And you're going back and forth. And I would say about each page is taking you, 2 to 3 minutes. Whereas this is not only checking it at a much faster rate, but also it's giving you the ability to work on something for your site launch that you don't need to worry about actually looking at yourself. So let's say you want to check all of these things, but you also want to check a very particular issue. You don't have to rely on your own time to look through these elements. You can have the script running in the background while you're addressing a more granular issue that you aren't going to be able to automate for.
Wow.
So this is about to wrap up. So as we are letting that run through, which should take just another minute or so, we'll talk a little bit about introducing some of the Screaming Frog data into the script. So really what I've found with using Screaming Frog, which, Screaming Frog and Botify are the two main staples of all things site crawling for SEOs. Screaming Frog is obviously the much more accessible for your everyday SEO who might not have enterprise solutions. What I found is that when you're trying to show these issues in metadata, it's exporting a lot of different pieces together. You're trying to show, your duplicate descriptions, your duplicate titles, your missing titles, your over character count, under character count, and you're filtering in your Excel sheet, you're exporting each of these things individually, and you're putting them all together. The idea is that you're taking your full export, your internal HTML export, just looking at all of your pages, and formatting it in a way where you can just get all of that data in one go. This should actually be the one that takes the least amount of time, just because it doesn't require pinging anything separate. I'm just letting this run through before I start running something else, and we're all done. Just to show everybody what this actually looks like when you're done. You get a full data frame, and when you export this into Excel, you're going to see that each of your URLs has been pinged. It's going to tell you what the status of the URL is, what the status code that was returned was, if there were any redirects when pinging that URL, if the no index tag was found, and if the canonical is actually in check. So with the metadata, what we're doing here is we're just reformatting our data, giving it an easier naming convention, filtering out non-indexable pages, and just getting everything in check for us to run through all of our data. Here, we're just looking for all the best practices for all things meta descriptions. If it's over a particular character count, I like to use 160. Some SEOs like to use 170. It always varies. One of the many SEO, it depends. But for these purposes, we're just keeping everything at the rate that Screaming Frog gives it. Over 60 character count, over 160 character count, under 70 character count, missing data and duplicate data. So we can just run that very quickly, and everything that would have required copying and pasting into an Excel sheet is now done in one fell swoop.
Nice.
With the meta titles, same exact thing. It's looking for over, under, missing, and duplicate. All that work that we would have just done from an Excel standpoint, from a Screaming Frog, copying, pasting, and exporting is all done. We're going to just put all of that data into a dictionary and just create a data frame out of it. With that, what we're going to have is just a breakdown of everything that we just found. How many of our meta titles, how many of our meta titles are missing? I actually misspelled something. How many of our meta titles are over character count, thin titles, missing titles, duplicate titles? Everything is all there in one fell swoop. And we are also holding every single one of the variables that represent each of these in their own variable that we're going to export out. So not only do we have the overview, but we have a breakdown of all of the URLs associated with these problems. And last but not least, we're going to look through site speed. So I'm not going to run across the entire site because it'll take some time, but what we're doing here is we are iterating over our Screaming Frog poll. We're going to call the server to actually get page speed data that we typically would be getting from a browser, but obviously on the back end. We're checking to see if that's going to return valid data. So I have some error handling here to say, for some reason, if PageSpeed Insights can't find it can't actually find that data, then it's not going to actually go through. It's just going to continue and try onto the next URL. Otherwise, it's just going to keep going through. We're pulling out a few different things, and I'm actually going to run this while I talk through them. We're pulling out a few different resources here. we're getting the number of resources requested, we're getting the page size in megabytes, we're getting the number of scripts that are being loaded into the page, the number of style sheets loaded into the page, the number of fonts loaded into the page, and the DOM size. From a speed perspective, we're getting the score, the typical Google score that we would get when running this on a browser, FCP, LCP, FID, and CSL, speed index, and the time to interactive. Some of this may be overkill for a team. I like to have more than less. The great thing about the PageSpeed Insights API is that it gives you a lot of data, whether you have, on a browser side, you're not really getting access to everything Google is actually looking for. The API has just such a swath of data, and this is only just a fraction of what they're actually looking for that I'm pulling out here. So for anybody who is interested in the PageSpeed API, I think it's one of the most interesting things to look for, especially as a new SEO looking to understand API calls. It's very straightforward, and it will give you a lot of the fundamentals of just making API calls to start in a really open and a little intense but good environment to learn. And finally, we're just going to take all of that information that we just pulled out and put it all together. And this is as simple as just taking all of our variables that we've been storing our data in throughout this whole process and putting it into one just definitive place. And so when we download this file,
let's see how it looks like. Yeah.
And I'm just going to share.
Yeah, I think the idea is that you guys can see that with this, you can customize the automation to your specific workflow, right? It's amazing that you can eliminate a lot of manual stuff.
Exactly. And so, running this over a site of around 300 something pages, I only pulled out some of the speed metrics, of course, so it would take more time if we ran it in full. But when you're running this script and you're pulling out all these resources, think about what you could be doing while the script is running in the background. You can put this all into one place and just run it without interruption. And in that time, think about just what else you can do for your own site, for your clients, for your team, where you may have lost that time just through manual QAing and looking through pages that just don't have, where your time is better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. So we're in the time, but Derek, this was amazing. Great job putting together this, and really thank you for sharing this with the community. We got a number of questions. Did we answer everybody? Brittany, I think we answered everybody's questions. If you guys have more questions, how can they reach out to you? How can they?
Yeah, so I keep a pretty open line of communication for pretty much anything. You can reach out to me via my LinkedIn. It's just first name, last name. You can reach out to me via Twitter at Derek_M_Hawk. And you can find me on GitHub. I believe that's just also under Derek_M_Hawk, where scripts very similar to this exist and are completely open source for the community.
Exactly. So Solar is asking about the Jupyter notebook. So we actually at Solar we had a tutorial yesterday, so you can find it on the RankSense Twitter account. You'll find actually even all the steps in the thread, so you can find it there. But Brittany, you might want to copy it here in the chat so they have it as well from the right. Yeah, and so we have, it's exciting that we and it's incredible that we have guests just like Derek. We're booked in until March, so we have every week we're gonna have a guest. We're gonna take a break during the holidays, but we have a lot of people from the community lined up. Next week is gonna be Charlie. We're really excited and looking forward for his tutorial next week. The format that works is on Thursdays we release the script. with all the steps. You're going to be able to play with it. And the following day, if, you know, a lot of times it's by the option of the script writer. They will give us a webinar like this with a walkthrough, so you guys understand the full context, understand their story. And this is going to be recorded. This is recorded, and Brittany's going to upload it to our YouTube channel so that you can rewatch it at your time as well, right? So hopefully you guys, you know, enjoyed, you know, as much as I did, and learn as much as I did from this. And this encourages you to try it. And if you're doing already Python code, you know, reach out to us. We're always open to get new guests. And this is how we learn. We learn by, you know, doing the work and also sharing it. When you're teaching and you learn as well. So I encourage you guys to do that. And we're building an amazing community. So we're really excited for that. So Derek, thank you very much again.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
We're good.
Thank you so much for joining us. And to everyone who's watching, I just wanted to mention that you'll all be getting an email with our Twitter as well as Derek's and our LinkedIn's. So if you want to contact us at any time, feel free to. You can reply to the email as well if you have any questions. And as Hamlet mentioned earlier, we will be uploading this to YouTube, and you will get that YouTube link in your email as well.
Thank you. Have a great and fantastic rest of the week, Derek. You did a fantastic job. We're really pleased and happy you did it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye.